Hey folks, welcome to Bear Mountain today. Well, Denise has said I grew these boat oar zucchinis, which actually these are moderate sized boat oars. And so I've got to be responsible for turning them into something we can eat other than composting them. There's probably lots of really good reasons to use these guys. They're not so far gone that they've turned color or even, got to the point where they've made big seeds in them. So they're still quite usable zucchinis. And I'm sure everybody's raised zucchini, I swear to God, I went out yesterday and it was only this big yesterday, honest. But so what we're gonna do is we're gonna make some zucchini bread. We posted a picture on Instagram a couple days ago about a first batch we did, and kind of got a lot of people asking a question to say, well, what was the recipe? How'd you guys make it? So I thought we'd kind of walk through it today. Denise is going to be giving me pointers because I'm not really good in the kitchen. I'm really good outside.
You're good in the kitchen, but I'm going to help and film.
So what we've got is...
Hi.
So what we're going to do is we're going to start today with one medium-sized boat oar. Some people call them marrows, but they're basically... this is probably, probably weighs about 3 or 4 pounds. It's got a lot of water in it, and it's probably, once you shred it up, it's going to end up making probably 4 to 6 cups of material. But for this recipe to make 2 loaves of bread, we only need to have 2 cups of shredded zucchini. So the extra zucchini you could do, that's shredded, you could make some other things out of it. Some people make it into like a pancake batter and almost make like add it to that and make it like a form of like a potato pancake.
Zucchini fritters.
Yeah, fritters.
You could make relish.
Yeah, if you want to go that far too, you could make some pickled relish.
And somebody suggested that besides muffins and bread, they would just be good in eggs, scrambled eggs.
Oh yeah, kind of almost like making a quiche in a way.
Right.
Yeah, so there's lots of good uses for this. Well, okay, so the recipe, what we're making today, this is gluten-free. Now, you can probably use the same recipe. You should be able to use the same recipe using regular flour. The difference in what we're doing is the recipe came from, by the way, give full credit here, Nikki Sizemore. We got this off the internet, and Denise said she was just doing random searches for gluten-free zucchini. And since I've got a problem with the gluten intolerance, this is kind of what we're going to be doing today. Now, this uses Bob's Red Mill 1-to-1. This is their form of like a baking flour that would be used for anything from cookies to soft breads, or quick breads, I guess they call them. The first thing, getting back to the recipe we're going to do here is we're going to roast our walnuts. I only need about a half cup to put in the thing that's once it's all shredded up. So what I do for walnuts is I like to kind of toast them up a bit, kind of brings out the flavor. And but you don't have to, if you don't have an ability to toast it, it's just a flavoring. You can use them, just the way they are. So I'll just put in our handy dandy little toaster oven for about 5 minutes or so. So the next thing that we're going to do while that's going is we're going to prep our zucchini. Now the zucchini itself is, we just chop off the ends. This is pretty much fresh right out of the garden. Now what I do is I'll turn it upside down to the end, and then I'm going to slice all the way through.
Zucchini has lots of moisture in it.
Yeah, it's a lot of water in it. Now what you can see,
shining.
You can see in the inside that the seeds weren't really fully developed. If they were a little more developed, I would scrape these guys out, but they're still in, kind of a really more part of the flesh than they are separate from the flesh. So in this case, I would just use it as is, but in some cases you might have a bigger one, or maybe it's a little older and those seeds are like formed. And so what you'd want to do is you'd want to scrape those guys out to get just to the meat of it itself. That way you can use even older zucchinis than you might think otherwise that you'd have to throw out. Now what we do there's many ways you can shred this stuff. You can shred it by hand. We're just going to use our old Cuisinart. So what I'm just going to do is kind of chop these guys into, spear size that'll fit into the opening of the Cuisinart.
You can also use a box cut cheese grater.
Yeah. Okay, so once we get these all chopped up, we'll show you how we go to the Cuisinart itself. The Cuisinart blade we use this is the shredder attachment that comes with it, and we're gonna shred up all this. This is gonna be much more than we're gonna need for the recipe. So like we said, we'll just use the extra for other recipes. Make sure I fit. Sometimes I don't slice them right. So basically, makes shredding really easy. So that, my friends, is how you shred a zucchini in 3.5 seconds. Okay, we got over probably close to 4 to 5 cups out of that in zucchini. As you can see, that's kind of got a little bit of like, I don't know what you want to call it. It's kind of got a sheen to it. And when you feel it, it feels like it's got a little bit of, it's excess moisture, but it's kind of the juice from the zucchini itself. So what I do, one of the things, when people kind of make a mistake in making some of this stuff is, and it's the same thing as like if you're making potato pancakes, you got to wash it and then strain out the extra water. And putting the zucchini in it that's been washed and all the excess moisture that you can squeezed out of it, makes the bread bake better. Because sometimes what happens if you leave too much excess moisture in this is it's cooking in the oven, you can get maybe uneven doneness to it.
Goopy centers and burnt edges.
Yeah, so the whole idea on this is what we're going to do is just give it a good wash, and then we're going to take a white linen cloth and probably take 2 batches to do it, but we're going to squeeze out all the excess water. And then what we don't use for the zucchini bread today, we'll use for making some fritters or something tomorrow. So just putting it into a large colander of some kind, or something where, you can drain the excess water out and you can wash it. So I just make sure that it's all been washed. And that's also key too, like I said, if you're making good potato pancakes and you shred your potatoes, you got to wash that excess starch and stuff that's on the outside of the actual shredded item off. Get that out of it. So we let this kind of drain for about 5 minutes to get as much of the water that's sitting loose in it off of it. But we got to take the last step, which is to take, I'm going to split this into 2 batches of it. And what we're going to do is squeeze out the excess water out of this. And be surprised at how much water is typically in this. So this is just a regular linen dish rag. You can use an old clean undershirt or something, whatever.
My grandma's.
So basically what I'm doing is I'm just squeezing this, and you can start hear the water. That's pretty good. So I'm just going to put this in the stainless steel bowl and do the other part. So we're using the smaller loaf pans, and the way I've always had problems with zucchini bread is sticking to the bottom of the pan. It used to drive me nuts. I've tried, using butter or lard, flouring the pan, and it all ends up I end up with kind of the same problem. I've found that the slickest way to do this is basically I butter the pan, and then I use a piece of parchment paper that I basically just cut to size and lay down the bottom with the sides hanging out. Now the ends don't have any parchment paper on it, but that's not the point. The point is when you're done, you can either lift the parchment paper and the entire loaf out in its entirety and let it then cool off, and peel the parchment paper off. Or in many cases, 10 minutes after you pull it out of the oven, you can just turn it over, dump out, and it'll slide right out. Okay, you know, you can see I'm really religious about making sure that I've spread it out evenly. So I'll basically just put these guys in like this. Like I said, what I did is I cut the length to the side of the pan. The grease will help it parchment paper stick nice and even. And that is good enough. So we'll just set those guys aside. Now we'll do the mixing. Now in this recipe, you want to mix the wet and the dry ingredients separate. The zucchini and the nuts are pretty much the last thing you're going to be adding in. And so we're going to be using 2 cups, or about roughly 296 grams, they say, which I guess is close enough to 300, of the all-in-one type flour. Again, you could use a King Arthur gluten-free flour. Doesn't matter, whatever your favorite gluten-free flour. Problem with gluten-free flour is, you know, if you're doing a lot of baking, you're probably going to want to make your own recipe. A lot of people do, and it's because it gets expensive to buy it pre-made up.
The bag doesn't go far.
And these little bags basically make 2 loaves.
4
loaves, I guess, 2 batches. Okay, so I got 2 cups of that, and then I'm going to put in 1 cup of the almond flour. This is just super fine almond flour. It's natural. It was not. They didn't take the skins off the almonds before they ground it up, but it wouldn't matter. I'm just using whole almond flour. And sometimes this stuff will clump up too, so you got to kind of be careful and kind of, you know, press it out. Make sure you got it. You can kind of see there's lumps in it. You know, these kinds of things are going to have to get broken up. And then we put our flavorings in. Cinnamon. I add pumpkin pie spice just as an extra because it is that time of year. Baking soda. This is the stuff we're going to use to leaven it with. Baking soda and baking powder.
But you could put allspice in it. You could put nutmeg in it. You could put apple pie spice in it. You know,
you could make it to what you think is for you.
You like.
It's just a matter of how much you want to put in, how strong you want it to be flavored. In this case, we're putting in for the leavening agents. It's 2. I got to make sure I get this right. 2 teaspoons of the baking powder and 1 teaspoon of the baking soda. Teaspoons, not tablespoons.
So 2 teaspoons of baking powder.
It's all white, right? Doesn't matter.
Yeah, it does. And 1 teaspoon of baking soda.
Okay.
And what's the ratio of the spices?
Well, first thing to do is also put in, now, if you don't need this much salt, this is going to be a flavoring issue to some degree. You could put in a teaspoon of salt. If you're on a salt-free diet, you might just consider skipping this step or just putting in a salt substitute. Like, I guess they have like Morton sells a salt substitute. That would work. I'm using a fine sea salt, or Redmond's old sea salt. And then this calls for this recipe only has 1 tablespoon of cinnamon as a spicing. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in 2 teaspoons of cinnamon. This is the fine Kirkland version.
Any kind works. It's just so bad. Now,
2 teaspoons.
Why did you do more than called for? Because we like things spicy.
No, it's a tablespoon of cinnamon.
Oh.
Okay, so I'm busting it's 3 teaspoons per tablespoon. Okay, and then I'm putting in the 3rd teaspoon as a generous. It's pumpkin pie spice.
Okay, and that's what was called for 1 teaspoon.
1 tablespoon. Okay, so we're keeping the same amount of spice. We just changed it up.
Okay.
Okay, that's all the dry ingredients as they call it. So at this point, the next step is I'll just use a fork to kind of mix it up. You gotta want to make sure to get the almond flour, you know, which tends to try to clump. You want to get that, you know, they're busted up so that there isn't any, you know, lumps in your bread. And then just get everything equally distributed in here. If you're using a mixer, you could do that too on a low, you know, with some kind of like whisk attachment to it. I'd probably do the same thing. This is going to end up being the big bowl. So when you're doing your dry ingredients, you want to use a large bowl. And when you're using your wet ingredients, you're mixing your eggs, the sugar. I don't know why they call sugar wet, but it goes with the eggs. And it's also going to have a milk in it and your vegetable oil, or in this case, we're going to use avocado oil. And then it has a little bit of a vanilla extract in it. That's what they call the wet. And so we get that whisked up real good with a whisk. And then it becomes a matter of combining the wet into the dry, mix that, and then bringing in, as the last step, the zucchini and then the nuts. And then at that point, there isn't anything more to do except put it in the pan. So I just want to make sure I got everything mixed up pretty good. Is going to use 4 eggs. They say large eggs. I'm going with mediums today.
Actually, aren't they large?
Well, they say they're large, but I've seen bigger.
Count or 18 count large.
I've seen bigger. Okay, so we got the eggs in there. I guess that's good enough to be out of the way. So I'm going scant. That's about
Until
it's
we
a little more than
practice
3/4.
and try with a sugar substitute. I don't know if you can use it on that and how it comes out, but we're just using regular sugar this time, and we'll play with the idea of using maybe a sugar substitute.
Okay, the next step is to add some milk. We're using whole milk just for its kind of richness, and you could use a nut milk. You know, any you know type of thing that works for you as a substitute, or even if you say I can't use whole milk, I want to cut down on the fat, that would work too. In this case, I'm going to go a 1/2 cup. Find my 1/2 cup measurement.
A liquid cup.
Yeah, well, it's got a little mark on the inside of the stainless steel, believe it or not.
I know. But a true baker uses the right cups.
Well, I'm not.
Yeah.
Okay. So then the next step is you're going to put in a form of a oil, like you'd use vegetable oils if that's what you're into. We're using avocado oil. There's all kinds of different oil. Whatever your favorite. What we're not looking for is you're not trying to use a saturated fat oil like coconut oil, because coconut oil is basically solid at room temperature. You want to use a type of healthy oil that is unsaturated. So
coconut oil will give it also another flavor.
And so will olive oil. So we're going with a kind of real neutral. And believe it or not, avocado oil is actually a fairly neutral flavor.
So it's not going to impart any kind of flavor in itself. It just does what it needs to do in terms of oil.
So we're going to put a 1/2 cup into that. Okay, so we got the olive oil in there. Last thing you're going to put in is a little vanilla for some flavor. Roughly about, they say 2 teaspoons. It seems like a lot, but actually it doesn't even taste it once you get it going. I'm going to do this until, you know, the sugar is dissolved into the eggs and the milk. It's kind of all evenly dispersed. The eggs seem to want to move around, so I can't get the yolks. And I'm going to kind of also emulsify it a little bit, meaning that the oil is mixed in with the egg white and the milk. Okay, so we got our wet ingredients and our dry ingredients done. Now, next step is basically starting to combine everything. Just going to go through and make sure I don't have any lumps, at least not many that are going to matter. So we're going to mix the wet ingredients into the dry. Okay, so I'm folding this in. Going to make sure it's all mixed in nicely. So the whole key is you need to have this, all the moisture and all that stuff mixed in with all the flour, so there's no dry spots of flour or anything before you start adding in the actual zucchini itself. And at this point, this is kind of a base in essence. So if you were doing something different, like a pumpkin bread or something like that, banana bread, you kind of follow the same recipe. It's the same base. It's just a quick bread recipe. So that's good to go. Now, I'm going to measure out 2 cups. Bet you thought I was going to dump this whole thing in, didn't you?
Yep, you would. And then go,
oops, I put in too much zucchini. How do I get it out? Okay, so I want to firmly packed 2 cups.
Any moisture?
Not really. I mean, it's moist to the touch, but it's not like, wet or sweaty or something like that. You know how stuff gets like that. Okay, 2 cups. Now look how much is left extra. Oh, we're going to have some...
Lots of fritters and...
Yeah.
Maybe that's enough for relish.
It might be for a small batch. Okay, the last thing I'm going to do is put in a 1/2 cup of nuts. I don't have a 1/2 cup stainless steel, so I'm just going to use put in 2/4. Good enough. Got some stuff on my hands there. And then just fold in the zucchini and the nuts. Trying to get it as equally dispersed in the dough as possible. So the last step we're going to do here is, let me get this in the right frame of things here. We're going to fill each of these pans as equally as possible. And that's always a challenge for me. Sometimes I get one overfilled. Let's start here and try to get to the next one. Well, hopefully we got it in there equally. So what I do is the last thing, just to make sure I get rid of air bubbles. This is just probably, I don't know, for good luck. Yeah. So there we go. They're filled up. You can kind of see.
Yep.
Looks pretty good. Let's get it in the oven. Yep, it's at 350. I'm going to set it at 50 minutes to start checking it, but and the only reason I do that is just to make sure I don't go to a point where, maybe it gets overdone. So that way it reminds me to come in and take a look at it. So we'll come back and check the progress at 50 minutes and then see where we can get to. Usually it takes about an hour, 10 minutes for that size pan for us to get completely done.
How do they look, Tony?
I think they look great. We're just going to do a little test in the center, see if there's any doughiness left on the knife blade. Oh, it's clean. That one's ready. Let's check this one. Yep, clean.
They look good. They
This has been
smell
an
good.
hour, 5 minutes. So it's a little bit faster than last time, but that's about right. So now we just take these guys out, put them on the rack over here for 10 minutes. So how do they smell?
Wonderful.
All right, let's check back in 10 minutes and we'll dump them out. Okay, these guys have been cooling for about 10 minutes. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna remove these from the pan and then take the parchment paper off and leave them on the rack and let them cool an additional, 30 minutes or so, or till, it gets down to the point where they're just gently warm. And the whole idea of why you don't want them to cool in the pan is because cooling in the pan, actually, you're gonna get some spots that may have some condensation. And what we wanna do, you can see the pan's pretty clean. Not super clean, but pretty clean. And then what we're going to do is just take the parchment paper off, and look at that. Isn't that perfect?
Yeah.
Perfect,
No
right?
sticking.
No sticking, no ripping the bottom off. Look at that. Nope, no flouring. So now they just stay on the rack and cool off. And in about probably 20 minutes or so, you know, you could slice into it and probably have it. If you slice too soon, you're going to get a lot of crumbling. You want it to kind of cool down, let the heat from it as it cools down take some of the moisture out of it so that the crumb holds together better on the bread. And that is it. So, I want to thank you guys for staying with us on this extra long video, but I just wanted to show you the process of what we do to make the bread and give you a couple of tips on, you know, how to make it look super cool. So it's a nice little dessert to have. So thanks.
Treat.
So we'll say thanks, folks, for coming along. And as always, stay safe out there, and we'll catch you on the next video. Bye-bye.
Bye.